Okay, so we've talked about epithelial tissue, talked about the basics of tissue. Now we're going to focus on connective tissue. All right, connective tissue is everywhere. Okay, it's found everywhere in the body. Every organ is usually composed of some kind of tissue and connective tissue. Now, big difference between this and epithelial tissue is connective tissue is never exposed to the outside environment, so it's completely covered. Only epithelial tissue is ever exposed to the outside environment. Since it's everywhere, most abundant, most widely used, you can see the basic functions. Variations in blood supply. Now, the reason this is an issue is when we talk vascularization and avascularization, this will impact healing. And the other thing that's interesting is when we talk tissue repair or tissue damage, some tissues are fairly well vascularized even though they don't appear to be it. Now, the primary reason some tissues aren't obviously well vascularized is because of this. This right here, extracellular matrix, is what really sets apart connective tissue from other tissues. And notice right here, it's a non-living material. So it's something that is outside and surrounding the cells that make up the tissue. Now, keep in mind a couple of things. You have what are known as cytes, blasts, and clast. Okay, cyte, C-Y-T-E, blast, B-L-A-S-T, and clast, C-L-A-S-T. Based on those suffixes, you know whether they are maintaining, breaking down, or building up. So osteocyte, osteo tells you bone. Okay, so just kind of go back to some of those prefixes and suffixes we've talked about. Okay, first thing with extracellular matrix. You have what's known as a ground substance, and then you have fibers. Now, the combination of ground substance and fibers is how we will be classifying our connective tissue here. So, when we talk about ground substance, primarily water, you have proteins, you have polysaccharide molecules. Depending upon the ground substance, it can be gel-like, it can be crystalline in nature. It just depends on what's going on. Now, the fibers, the fibers are basically collagen, elastic, and reticular. When you talk about the three types of fibers, each one brings a different strength to the table, shall we say. All right, so the combination of these is what, as I said, is going to determine our connective tissue. Now, you can see the three classifications that we see. All right, first one, when we talk proper, lots of cells. Fibroblasts, again, remember what I told you. Blast means to build up. So anytime you see blast, we're talking about building something. So fibroblast, it builds fibers. So we associate this with the making of collagen fibers or elastin fibers, etc. Now, macrophages we'll talk a little bit of detail with when we go into the lymphatic system. For the most part, defense. You should already have a little bit of knowledge about that anyway. It's basic immune response. And then now we have a new kind of cell, the mast cell. Now, these become active after injury. Now, the matrix is usually syrupy, clear, or colorless. You don't really notice it. In fact, it seems fairly absent because the fibers are what takes center stage. Okay, so the fibers in connective tissue proper are the primary components, what you notice. All right, now you can see where you're going to find this. Okay, when we look at the first one, areolar tissue, notice, okay, you can see the fibers, you can see the cells, you can see reticular fibers, elastic fibers, collagen fibers, and then the different cell types. So these heavy-duty ones here, those are collagen. These squirrely ones, those are going to be your elastic fibers, I believe. And then this faint one here in the back, I think, is going to be your reticular fiber. In any case, when you think of areolar tissue, if you've ever skinned chicken, you know, if you buy the thighs or whatever and you skin it and you go to peel that skin up, you can see that spider web stuff, the cobweb-like stuff that's there kind of holding it to the muscle underneath. That's areolar tissue. It's what helps hold our skin to our muscles and to the tissue below. Now, you can see here, they're showing you in essence epithelial tissue. Here's the step below, okay, and then you can see that this stuff is actually composed of our areolar tissue. Now, lots of fluid, so that's why sometimes swelling actually gets kind of pulled into this area. It can hold a fair amount of water. All right, next one, adipose tissue. Adipose tissue, the fat cells. It's a cellulite we all fear as we get older, that cottage cheese, pockmark-like appearance. Yeah, it's disgusting. But we have to have a fair amount of adipose tissue. Not to mention the fact that the fat, okay, those triglycerides, as you should remember from biology, have a lot of bang for their buck if we talk chemical energy. So keep in mind the body's very efficient. It doesn't waste, so it's going to store energy in the most efficient manner possible, which usually means fat, and it's going to do that in adipose tissue. Now, the interesting thing about adipose tissue is we can empty out these vacuoles because it's mostly a giant vacuole. Okay, you remember plant cells, right? So it's mostly a giant vacuole, but, and by the way, here's the nucleus, and this is the rest of that cell, so it's mostly a giant vacuole. You can empty that. So let's say you gain a little weight and then you lose a little weight. You empty that vacuole, but you don't destroy the cell. To me, that's the interesting thing about adipose tissue. That's partly why, aside from other nutritional reasons, I think that's partly why you see some of that yo-yo effect if you've gained and lost. Okay? Now, primary functions, you can write those down. Again, you can notice, you can see it's just mostly empty space. It's just storage. It's a storage cell. Now, dense connective tissue. Okay, dense connective tissue, primarily collagen fibers. We associate this, and by the way, you can see the fibroblasts. And again, let's go back real quick. When you looked at the areolar tissue, okay, when you look at the adipose tissue, and now we're looking at the collagen, the dense connective tissue, what do you notice? You can't see the extra, you can't see that gel-like substance. Again, the fibers are what are predominantly present. Okay, now one of the things you want to keep in mind, dense connective tissue sometimes gets confused when students look through the scope, or sometimes they will confuse dense connective tissue with, say, muscular tissue or smooth muscle tissue specifically. One of the things to keep in mind that's different is you can really see a linear, all of these lines, it's like you can follow a line and you can follow it all the way through. It's very regular, it's very patterned. Okay, when we look at smooth muscle tissue, it's not quite so clear cut. It's not like I just took line upon line upon line and drew them out. In addition, the fibroblast cells are a little more sparse. Okay, it's not as dense with cell components. All right, the last one that we're going to talk about in terms of connective tissue proper is reticular tissue. Now, reticular tissue we associate primarily with our lymphatic system, primarily because you have the reticular fibers, okay, and then you have the cells, you have reticular cells and different things. It's a very different kind of fiber. And so here you can see the growing lymphocytes, reticular fibers kind of holding everything down. You can see the cells, etc. It's what's known as an internal supporting network. Stroma, you've heard that reference before when you looked at plant cells and talked about how the oh, criminy, the little green stacked things. It'll come to me. In any case, you know what I'm saying. So you get this idea of this very almost grape-like thing. You've got this central stem and you've got all these various things coming off of it because it provides that network of support. All right. Now, only fluid connective tissue we have is blood. Again, you're not aware of the ground substance, you're aware of the cells within the ground substance. Okay. And different cell types we'll talk about when we talk about the blood and the cardiovascular system. When and only time we see the fibers that we associate with connective tissue is when we see a clot being formed, when something happens to a vessel and we see bleeding out. That's the only time we see the fibers here. Now, bone. Bone is a very unique connective tissue because it's solid, it's hard, it is composed of a crystalline extracellular matrix. Okay, specifically calcium and phosphorus, what's known as hydroxyapatite. In essence, I want to say it's like Ca3PO42. Okay, in any case, it's a very, very crystalline, hard structure. Now, it is the hardest of the connective tissues because we also have connective tissue in it in the form of, a different fiber in the form of collagen. So when we look at collagen, what we see is we have the osteocytes, we see the calcium phosphate salts, and we have collagen fibers. Think of the collagen as the rebar in reinforced concrete. Part of the reason bone is so hard is it is built much like reinforced concrete. You pour the concrete, but you have those rebar in there to kind of give it a little bit of flexibility and support. That's exactly what the collagen does. So that's partly why bone is so strong. Now, the other interesting thing is all of these black spots, okay, those are the osteocytes. Remember, site means maintain. So there's tons of living cells in our bones. So with that many living cells in our bones, what does that tell you about the vascularization of bone? It's highly vascularized. Okay. Now, cartilages are the least vascularized of the connective tissues. Very readily apparent, we have a very present gel-like outer ground substance, and the fibers are not always as obvious. Now, hyaline tissue, you can see, looks glassy, okay? And then we've got these holes. See, we see chondrocytes, chondra telling you cartilage, site, maintain, okay? So we have chondrocytes and hyaline, it's the most abundant. Then we go to elastic. Okay, elastic, you can actually see more of the fibers. Still has that glass-like appearance. It's just kind of fractured glass. It's got these fibers kind of running around through it. Okay, so again, kind of looks like a shattered windshield, doesn't it? Okay, and then the last one is our fibrocartilage. And fibrocartilage, again, very strong fibers. The big difference between elastic cartilage and fibrocartilage, the fibers seem, again, to be symmetrical. They kind of run in a single direction. With elastic, not so much. Okay? Make sure you pay attention to the scope work as you're going through this and pay attention to these key features we've just discussed.